Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 410, featuring Yuval Levy. He's a director, creative director, and visual effects supervisor over at The-Artery. He was a fascinating person. This is, by the way, I want to say this is a recommended podcast. If you go to labs@chaos.com and you recommend someone you'd like to have us on, we're more than happy to see it. I'm super glad we were able to talk to Yuval. He is such a nice guy, really nice, super creative. He and I geeked out about car aesthetics and car commercials for a while because he and I both did some cool stuff with cars. But he's also done a bunch of amazing stuff as far as actually being a director. He's directed a bunch of commercials, and he's done a bunch of really cool visual effects in feature films, including Smile, which came out recently, and I'm very excited to see that. And so he was a really cool guy. Kristen, what did you think of Yuval?
Yeah, well, like you said, you kind of talk about a wide range of topics in this podcast. And he also just kind of takes us through, obviously, how he got started. Then he kind of discusses VFX and documentaries way back when and kind of how those evolved. That was really neat. LED wall projects, working with the director to enhance shots. You guys discuss a little bit of AI and then the secret of Nascar headlights. So, a lot of good topics. And like you said, one movie that came out recently, he's worked on Smile, which is my favorite horror movie. Everyone go see it. Others include The Other Guys, The Adjustment Bureau, which he discusses how he replaced Emily Blunt's face just before AI tracking was like really there to help. So that was awesome. And also Hocus Pocus 2, which came out this year. So he's worked on some amazing projects. He discusses kind of what's next for him and a couple projects that aren't released yet, but will be soon. So yeah, great podcast.
Great podcast. And very recent projects too. Hocus Pocus 2 is obviously. Is it true? Is Smile one of your favorite horror films?
Yes, I loved it.
Really?
Yes.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm. It's good. Yeah.
I love it.
It's hard to find a good horror movie. So.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think the horror is kind of back in some ways, but I think the really psychological weird ones are harder to find these days.
Yeah, this one was like it. The entire movie was just, it was great.
Well, you
told
know
everyone about it.
So. You know how much I love, a good movie discussion. So anyway,
yes.
All right, cool. So a couple of announcements. We don't have any product announcement just yet. It is just the beginning of the year, so you should expect to see some in the next few months as we start to roll a few things out. But if you can always look at chaos.com to keep track of what's going on. We do have 2 events happening at the end of this month. Kristen, what is going on?
Yeah, so you can find these out at chaos.com/events. They are actually both happening on January 25th. One is a webinar, which we've discussed in previous weeks. It's tools and techniques to visualize an eco-friendly home. And it will be discussing with Chaos Vantage and V-Ray 6 for SketchUp. And the second one is another Chaos Campus live show. This one is with Pedro Fernandez. You can learn how you can master post-production and crafting powerful narratives in our quiz. So
really cool.
Check those out.
Absolutely should check those out. I was actually, the eco-friendly home, it was something that I visited with Lon over in the Palm Springs area. It's a really cool project. You guys should check it out, even just to see some of the interesting things about that project as well. But it's a really cool thing, and definitely check it out. And Pedro is one of the nicest people in the world, so you definitely go check those out. Both of those are on January 25th. Again, just go to chaos.com/event for more details and make sure to sign up if you need to sign up for. But if people want to know more about the podcast, Kristen, where can they go?
You can go to facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast or chaos.com/CG Garage. And if you'd like to watch us, go to youtube.com/Chaos Group TV.
Perfect. And of course, don't forget to recommend us other people you'd like to have on, like this particular podcast, which came from a recommendation. Just email us, labs@chaos.com. And of course, if you have any other commentary or questions about it, we would love to hear from you. Again, that email is labs@chaos.com. But for now, please enjoy episode number 410 with Yuval Levy.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, You need to make sure everything has for now.
Well, cool. Well, thank you so much, Yuval. I appreciate you being on. I've been looking a little bit into your background, but I'm sure you can give me a much better idea as to where you came from and some of the, obviously you've been doing some really great work recently, and I'm very excited to hear about some of those projects. But tell me a little bit about yourself, like what got you into visual effects and the film industry and all of that.
I think I always loved, obviously movies, but also loved art. I think really starting from art, that's where I came from, classic art. So as a kid, drawing and sculpting, and that led me into animation, classical animation and stop motion. And from there, naturally evolve into more computer art and 3D animation, CG, and from there, my path went into television, working on commercials, starting as an animator. Then after that, leading teams of animators and supervising, and kind of like growing up from there into working on different projects between. Really, whatever screen possible. So I've been doing many different things, but my passion mostly is working on feature films. That's what I've been doing recently. More of that.
Have you? And now you you said you were obviously in art. Did you study art? Did you go to school for art?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Study art. And
where did you go to school?
I went to school. I'm actually from Israel, so I went to school over there. But the school that I went to doesn't exist anymore, but it was computer art. That's how.
Oh, really?
Back then, yeah. So it was traditional art, sort of leading into what was back then the very beginning of thinking about how can we, use that for art. I don't know if the art world considered computer art as art.
Yep.
Back then, I think even within the traditional animation world, there was sort of like it took some time for computer animation to be accepted into what is considered classical animation.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
So what year are we talking about approximately?
I think when I started out was when I finished that school and started out in the industry was 99. So it's not that far, but it's far enough.
Yeah, no, it was around that time where like there was more and more CG that was happening, but yeah, especially like it's interesting, especially with stop motion around after the Jurassic Park time when all of a sudden people were like, wait a minute, this is something else that can take over. So it was interesting, but it's cool that you had a background in stop motion and traditional animation as well, right?
Yeah. Sort of like never professional, but just playing around with that, and was very passionate about that at the time. But it was always there's something about the fact that within the softwares in the computer you'll be able. I was able to move faster. That actually I felt will be easier for me to proceed to create longer films at a time. So
right. And were you always into computers, or is that something you had to pick up as a when you were in school?
No, sort of like always into computers. My mom was a computer analyst, so we always had a computer at home. So I think even when I was drawing as a kid, I was always drawing on those mainframe outputs papers. I don't know if you remember. So there's always that connection between classical art and computer for me in somewhere in the brain. Yeah, they relate together. Yeah, it never sounds like there was not a clash. I think some people back then at least had a clash between the word art and a computer. Like, how is this thing really relates to one each other?
Right.
Today is something we take for granted, but back, the 90s, that was something else.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. There's a lot of clash that happened back then, and and those battles still happen today. I mean, when you look what's going on specifically with AI art and how people are confronted with those situations today. So I'm very curious about that. But okay, so were you able to do? Were you doing some CG work in Israel when you started, or did you start?
Definitely.
Looking? Yeah.
No, I was doing kind of like working there in the industry back then, doing a lot of work there. mainly commercials.
Okay.
Not that much feature work back then happening. But yeah, definitely the cutting edge of what was back then over there, CG, and trying to sort of like up the game, because I think because it's a small industry there, we're not too many people, but we're sort of like competing with one each other and trying to push whatever, trying to imitate stuff that we've seen coming from Hollywood in the big boys and all that.
And I'm assuming because, obviously it was a smaller industry over there, you were much more of a generalist. Is that correct?
I would say, yeah, back then, a lot of generalists, you had to sort of do it all, or at least you were expected to know to do everything. But we started seeing even back then that different people have different fields they're strong at. Especially, I would say, character animation is something that just stands out to me, because we had. I used to work with that guy who was an immigrant from Russia, but he had a very traditional animation, like character, like he would draw animation, classical animation background from Russia for, I don't know, 20 years worth of, and he was kind of like transferring his knowledge into the computer.
Yeah.
And it was amazing, the stuff that he was accomplishing and the tools that he was using. He had a completely different way of thinking about 3D animation.
Yep.
And the way he was seeing it, the way he was translating it was mind bending. And we saw that definitely, that's what he can do. But the rest of the things that were, the rest of the tools were not as accessible.
Sure.
You would see the animation straightforward, but around it was kind of dark. So, there's definitely strengths and weaknesses. So we started to build a team and started, okay, this one person will be a modeler, a texture artist, lighter, compositor. We started to work that way, even then, back then, yeah, a little bit.
Okay. All right. And what were you guys using?
I used 3D Max beginning, but then it was the early days of Maya. So we used Maya, and it was very small sort of company. We could call the headquarters in Toronto and ask questions and actually talk to the developers. It was, the stuff that we worked on was on their reel.
Nice.
Yeah, it was nice.
Nice. That's awesome. Okay. So how long were you working in Israel?
I worked there for, I think it was about 4 years.
Okay.
And then moved to Toronto.
Okay.
And Canada, and continued to work there. Doing more television commercials, but starting to work more on documentaries.
Oh.
Which is a little longer form, I think, which is interesting. What you can do is visual effects and documentary. I think that was the beginning of people thinking, we can show things using computer graphics that we couldn't show before, while we want to explain things, especially in documentary.
Well, give me an example. Give me an example of one of the projects you were working on.
I mean, the most simple, the one that jumps, actually not the one that's the most glorified, but I'm thinking we did that show about plane crashes.
Okay. All right.
Kind of take every show was about a different one that happened in a different time. And we were able to show technically how things happen mid-air.
Right.
Sort of like make that. We're talking about a long time ago, but it was cool back then, making that plane transparent and zooming into one rivet, or how the engine works, show that breaking apart and coming together, and what was the malfunction that happened. You could actually show that. Back then it was wow. Today we take those things for granted. Sure. But it's something that before computer, we had such a great control with computer graphic, would have been almost impossible to show. And it really it's a helpful tool to tell a story. It's also a helpful tool to deceive information, right? To manipulate history, which is also something we did. But yeah.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I know a lot of people back around that time that I've interviewed on the show. Some of them had started actually in doing what they call digital forensics for law for trial cases, where they would
Right.
show an accident or something like that, and or some case like that. And it's hard to try to, if you're trying to convey a true story, but for you, you're doing a documentary, right? So you have to make it entertaining at the same time and not embellish the story.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely getting exposed to, the question of what is truth.
Right.
And when you help somebody tell the truth, but you're actually generating images in computer,
Right.
you're inventing information based on pieces of information. So you're creating a reality, which at the end will be viewed by possibly millions of people.
Yep.
And yeah, we are part of you realizing that, we talked about AI and we can talk about that further, but it's like all of that question of like really, there's a certain point where you realize that you're using a very powerful tool
Sure.
that could convey a reality that not necessarily aligned with what truth is.
Yeah. That's very, that is actually very true.
Yeah.
And will become an important part of our conversation. I'm sure we're going to be talking about AI, and so we can continue that what truth is question a little bit later. Okay, great. So you were in Toronto, and you were working on doing some interesting stuff, commercials and documentaries. And how did that expand from there?
Later on, I moved to New York, which is where I'm currently at. Continue to work on commercials and working on starting to work on feature films back then, and that's sort of like pretty much doing that. Later on, started to direct also some commercials.
And what was your specialty at that time? Like, were you already in supervising at that time, or were you more of a compositing or more lighting?
No.
Or?
I was supervising already back then.
Okay.
And head of CG.
Okay.
And creative director, and then later on directing small, mainly commercials that are like visual effects driven, let's say.
Yep.
But I think specialty, I mean, it's kind of, I think we had to be, especially when you work on commercials, you have to be very diverse, a little bit like a Swiss knife. You have to figure out solutions to different projects that come. So it's really about collaborating with people that have different strengths. So if you have a project that's more graphic based, you'll team up with those amazing graphic artists and support them and kind of like have them drive with you to a certain direction. Definitely a lot of photorealistic work that we did is very different. So it's sort of like shifting between different worlds, but that's I think that's a strength, and it's actually sort of like keep you interested in what you're doing because there's less repetition. It's a very dynamic world.
Right.
But I would say for feature film, we mainly do like hyperrealism or photoreal.
Sure.
So almost invisible effects, if you will.
Right.
I mean, they're visible, but many times they are also invisible.
Well, that's the goal, right? Of visual effects. If people don't realize that they're looking at something that was generated, then you've
it's tricky. I mean, I think many times if you do your work well and you become invisible, you sort of like getting lost. Your work is lost.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's tough.
Yep.
People ask you, so what did you do? I did 30 shots of replacing someone's face. If you did it well, you deep faked it,
Right.
Sometimes even the actor wouldn't know that he
Sure.
didn't play those roles,
Right. Yeah. Interesting. So what were some of the projects you worked on? What's the features you were working on in those early days?
I think one that I really love mentioning is Adjustment Bureau. We worked on.
Nice.
It was sort of like it was exactly what we're talking about. The visual effects were supposed to be invisible, but they're very visible conceptually.
Sure.
Opening doors and they're in one place. They open the door and they're in a completely different place. They look back through the door. They see the one place that they came from, which is not necessarily where they are now.
Right.
So we had to come up with a lot of solutions.
Nice.
But ultimately, it had to feel very tangible and practical. We did a lot of practical tricks with CG. That was a pretty big project. We had Emily Blunt that was not dancing the ballet parts. She's dancing there to replace her face.
Okay.
That was interesting back then to do a face replacement. And again, looking today on the deep fake and all those tools you have, I'm amazed of how easier it got. But back then it was, it was hard. It was before we had AI that could do that. So we had to
hand track.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of we found some tools that helped us really track, but we had to
Sure.
do a lot of positioning and really recreate her face with different layers and
And how close were you getting to her face? Pretty close, I guess, huh?
Pretty close, yeah, pretty close. You could see her. We had to animate her expressions, on her face just to look as if she's dancing. So close her eyes and her face react. Like a little bit of this strain on her face as she's pulling those more complicated moves.
Sure.
Worked on Tower Heist. There was another interesting one that we worked on back then. Which was, again, Eddie Murphy and a team of other actors stealing a Ferrari for Trump Tower in New York. And the car is dangling out of this high tower. Right. And it was that was a pretty complex movie as well.
Okay. And where were you working at this point?
At this point, I'm working in a company called Gravity, which is a company I worked for many years.
Okay.
Those are the feature work. I worked on an interesting commercial campaign for Ford F-150 at the time.
Okay.
With Dennis Leary. I don't know, maybe you've seen these.
Yeah. Oh, right. I remember he did a bunch of commercials. Yeah.
Yeah, when he's talking in the background, all these graphics happening.
Yep.
So I had the honor to direct that campaign for 2.5 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's like lots of commercial. That's almost a full-time job.
Yeah.
Working with that. And it's very graphic, but involve real cars that were color corrected to look as if they're graphic within that world.
Okay. I was going to ask you if you did CG cars or not.
There's something about, we were going back and forth. We had few CG cars there, but sometimes we felt that car has such a character when it actually drives, all the interaction with the ground and the practical effect of that, how that car, especially the bigger ones, the way they move. We really want to try and capture that in camera and color correct it to look as if it was graphic, posterize it. But we want to try and capture it for real. So we actually went out there to Mojave Desert and shot, the car jumping and diving into puddles and, reacting with the desert and the dirt and getting all that stuff in reality.
Yeah, I actually did a lot of car commercials way back in the day. I was working at a company called Sway, and we did a bunch of commercials. And it is very tough to get those dynamics right. We actually had developed our own car simulator to try to get the right. It's the only way to make it work, right? Because it's animating a car by hand it's the uncanny valley of cars. You can definitely tell. That's
true. There's something about, that one piece of earth that tumbling there and getting caught in the, in the bumper, in the rim bump. Like there's things that happen in reality that you can't really quite replicate 100%. And again, if you have the ability to go and do it, why not?
Yeah, and why not go to the Mojave Desert if they're going to pay for that, right?
Exactly. And then we had what they call today used to be the Russian arm or the Ukraine.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of fun always to just sit.
Did they call it a Ukraine now?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, that's kind of awesome.
It's a correction because it's actually. I'm not going to get into this discussion. That's what I heard.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I'll take your word for it. That's interesting.
So it was a lot of fun writing in one of them. And,
just so people know, like this, I know what a Ukraine is, but describe what it is so people understand what you're talking about.
So it's a car. I think usually they use,
it's like a Porsche SUV usually, right?
Yeah, that's the classic one. I've seen recently they've been doing it with some other car.
But you
Other
want a
cars.
beefy, powerful performance car that's big.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely. Because they need to carry usually 4 people and a crane.
On top of the
And
car.
exactly, the crane is on top of the car, and it could turn around. It has a gyro that keeps the camera, at bay, sort of like in horizontal plane, so it's not dutched.
Right.
And it's fully robotic, the crane, and it's being controlled from one person who sits in the car.
Yep.
So we have one guy who controls the crane and the camera. And then you have the actual base of the car that's being controlled by the driver that turns around the whole base of that crane that the camera is operated.
Right.
And then that whole thing is looking into another car usually that's being driven by somebody else. So all of these people have to be
Yep.
coordinating together very closely.
Yep. And the director is usually in the car trying to see what's going
Directors in
on.
the car too. Yeah, so those are. So it's pretty complex operation, but it's a lot of fun to be part of it when you're there. Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, I car commercials is a whole breed, and you did it for, you said 2.5 years.
I did Ford F-150, but I did BMW, worked on Mercedes commercial, Cadillac, whatever, different cars. Yeah, I had quite a lot of cars commercial experience. Sometimes, I mean, some of them are really boring. Some of them are super interesting.
Yep.
Some of them are more creative. Some of them are less. That one that I got to direct was extremely different because we could go very graphic with our campaign to the point that some of those shots you wouldn't be able to even, the car became like just an icon of the car.
Sure.
Which is unheard of because that's the product. Usually, as you know, they want to show their car in the most glorious way.
Yep.
But we pushed to that place that we thought, it's so iconic that even if you see just a silhouette of it, you'll know what car it is.
Yeah, it's so cool. I do have some fond memories of doing car campaigns myself. I did a bunch of Scion commercials, and Scion ones were like super graphic. I think if you remember.
Right. I remember. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so they were done by a guy named Simon, who was the owner of the Attic. And he loved those super graphic looks to things, and it was really fun, really fun to sort of look at how those cars can be and what they're doing. What's some of your favorite parts of looking at a car in a commercial? Like, what's some of the favorite things you like?
That's a tough question. Actually, it's sad to admit, but I did spend a lot of time thinking about it.
I know. That's why I'm asking.
It's really about thinking about who's gonna buy the car.
Yeah.
Because it's like you're saying, like the Siren, right? It's very graphic because I think it will lend itself to a very young audience, right? So you want to have the sparky color, disco, drive through the city. The city becomes a club sort of place, right?
Right.
And then you have more of those luxurious car. If you drive a Cadillac, just trying to say to tell you something different, and it's sort of the world have to respond to the car. It has to be one. It's like, what do you want to reflect that the car is? What kind of experience you get when you're driving it? I think what we do graphically, what we do visual effects, sort of like has to live within that message. Mm-hmm. So you have to click with the agency on that and with the client ultimately.
Sure.
I think for the F-150, it's a very specific type, or that you're kind of like that we're talking about, the working class people who are like hard at work.
It's the number one selling car in America.
Yes, it is.
Of all cars, including trucks, SUVs, cars. Everything.
Yeah. And that's why it was so amazing. And it's like sort of like set the tone for Detroit, if you had a good year or a bad year. So it's, there's something about that has to be very real, very realistic. Again, goes back to why we shot real cars. Very believable, like trustworthy, conceptually. So I think this is one of the things that I'm always looking at car commercials, and I'll give you another example. Like that we talked a lot when we were doing those spots. Usually when you sell a car, let's say BMW, it will be perfectly clean.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, came out, making sure there's nothing on it. But when we shot those commercials, we actually had them go for a run, getting some dust, getting some mud stains, so they look like they've been around. Like it's to get that feel that, that's a beast that just like traveled through the, the desert and, puddles and got her hand dirty. And it's sort of like reflecting on it goes back to who's going to watch it. What is the message?
Sure.
What are we trying to convey? So I like that journey about thinking about the message. It's, the car is a vehicle, vehicle of thought. And it represents something about people. Like you drive a car, represents something in you.
Yes.
If you're a person who will buy a Lamborghini, that's a different story than somebody who drives F-150 or Scion. It's very interesting. So, I mean, you can go deep into that.
Oh, yeah. I absolutely. I've always sort of had this thing, and I'm not necessarily a big car person. I sort of landed into car commercials for a while. But when I got involved in this world, it was just like, understand, and especially like things like the Scion. I was like, okay, like all the different trim packages and this, how everyone thinks about it. And just hearing how agencies and different car companies talk about their cars, it's so important. And the things that, and I'm sure you know this, but like making sure that when you're looking at a car, the headlight is like one of the most, it's like looking into the eyes of the car, and just all of a sudden this car that you're working on just becomes a personality that is
exactly, And how you feature, I mean, it's really amazing with anything, but with cars, especially any product, which is always part of commercials, but how, the lensing change how the car looks.
Oh, yeah.
Some cars you want to be more flat, some cars you want to be wider.
Yep.
It's just decision on the angle of where you're looking. I think this year I actually directed a commercial for Nascar.
Oh, yeah.
Which is interesting, very interesting cars, So I went out there and looked at their new cars, and they changed them completely, but they're sort of like fiberglass, what they are, they're like they're pinned into the chassis,
into the frame,
and like it's interesting you're saying the headlights are not real headlights.
No, they're stickers.
They're stickers, and naturally we're trying to.
Why even bother with the sticker?
There's no highlights. So how do you? So you go back. It's like, how do you make it feel like real? Maybe we don't want to make it feel real because everybody knows that it's fake. So it's like, how do you play those stickers in a cool way?
Right.
And it was interesting because it was still a car. Those NASCAR cars, they were still cars, but they're telling a different story, completely different story. And it was another one that I had to go in my head and look for. What's cool? So it's like, obviously you notice that net on the window.
Sure.
That protects the head of the driver to kind of like go out, right? That's a cool feature. I want to see that,
right.
Which I've never worked on a car commercial that had that because no cars need that.
Right. Yeah. But it's funny, like even just the idea that, the headlight is a sticker on NASCAR, like why bother with that? It's like, I guess we expect it to have a headlight, so we have to put it. If it didn't have the headlight, we would think the car looks strange,
That's somebody once told me that. I think it was ahead of some design school. We were talking about design, and he said, design, it's not something that you see. It's really a concept,
Right.
We're thinking about visual art. We think about the visuality of it. That's just the output. The very end is what we see. So the sticker goes to the concept of like, we're looking for something. It needs to be there. We don't even care why.
Right.
There's a need. It's like, it's the concept of what a car is, what a cool car is. It needs headlights. It doesn't.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Sorry, I didn't mean to go down the rabbit hole about cars because I wanted to talk a little bit about features.
It's part of what part of our history, I guess. So
yeah, for sure. This is great. Okay, so tell me a little bit about features. Obviously, you continue to work on certain features more recently, and I think you've obviously worked on the new one that came out recently with Smile. But what sort of led you to tell us a little bit about more recently, what some of the more recent work you've been doing?
So actually, was directing some more, doing some more creative direction, and then Actually, the last project I did was more of artwork. I worked on LED screens, did some simulations uh, for LED screens. So it was really an art project I worked on with.
And where was that?
That was in New York. Some of the work was shown in Masmoka Digital Waves called. And long story short, I was away for a little bit working on that. Then my friend Vico, the owner of the company I work with now, The-Artery, he called me and said, "Listen, I need you to look into this project." And it's a complex project because it involves practical effects that happen in camera. So it really like the director wants to get everything in camera, really wanted to get everything practical. Obviously, there'll be CG and 2D and a mix of all of those things, sort of like extending what we will never be able to get in practicality. And it's something that I did before, and it's something that I've always been interested in. I guess maybe because I'm coming from the art world and like really feeling materials, and sort of came to CG as an always wanting to extend practical stuff. And just conceptually, I do believe, it's what we talked about F-150, you know, that there's things that happen practically that if you can go and get them, you know, and you have the ability, you have the production, you have the camera, you have the crew, you have the Ukraine, right? And you can go and jump on a Porsche and do that, like have fun, enjoy, you know, and come back and look at it. And whenever reality stops, that's where you start extending it. I really love that idea. And I think that's where sort of like that collaboration was born. And I went on set and I met this younger director who was growing up on all those movies being done, I think in the 80s, 90s, that had more of a practical sort of like approach, right? Once there will be something you will create,
right?
And there will be some animatronics happening in the back. They always felt kind of clunky, but there was something really terrifying about those movies. Like they really, you know, dent you in a different way.
Sure.
And then the visual effects that you're seeing. And we talked a little bit about that. And I do agree that there's certain, I guess when you go into this, when you watch a movie, there is a suspension of belief, right? That happens. But somewhere in the back of your head, you're thinking, oh, that is computer generated. You realize, you see it. If you don't see it, you sense it in some way or another. And you sort of going into that path of believing it, but also not really believing it because you know it's being computer generated.
Okay.
And I put in that category like most of the movies that are being created now. So how can we dial into something more? There's something different. What will be the way? And of course, when you talk about a horror movie, that's something that potentially will make the movie much more scarier,
right?
Because we'll really make it much more believable. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think there's I think a little bit of, well, there's a little bit of both here, because I think you're absolutely right. I think I'm all for doing as much in camera as possible because of for several reasons. One is it eliminates the choices that you have to make later.
Yeah, it's definitely much faster. I agree. Like the decision is being made on set pretty much.
Yeah. And then you have that. And so then you work from that, right? So it's as opposed to, well, let's make it look like this or make it look like this. And it's like, that's the worst in terms of how to waste money. But the other thing is there was a moment, you know, in around 2000, I don't know, 10 or 12 or 13 that there was a lot of people that were very anti-CG and in the world. And they were basically like, it's all terrible. It's all bad. And the reason they would say, oh, this movie is bad because it has CG, which really used to upset me as an idea. Right. And because really what was happening is I think the industry was relying on big CG to fill in for the bad story that they created.
Yeah, that's true.
So, and
Yeah.
so they would blame it because they would notice the CG. But I think specifically when something is really compelling and really has you engaged and the story's really good, you don't notice the CG as much for two reasons. One is if you do it practically, you blend it in, just like you were describing, right? If you're doing it practically, you have a reference to match much better, right? And that's also a really good thing. But I think also it's like it really engages you. Then that emotionally becomes part of the experience. How did you work with the director in terms of trying to, enhance what was shot? Like what was the plan there?
Yeah, so it's always I mean, when you go to that direction, you always go into the world of like, okay, we're going to do it. Sometimes we'll have to erase it completely in order
Yep.
to replace it. And sometimes we'll have to take many, many pieces of that and just combine it into a different shot altogether. We'll have to duplicate things. We'll have to manipulate it in a million different ways. Sometimes you ask yourself, probably be easier to just do it all in CG, like not have any, and you got to deal with all those people, right? The effects artists, the wardrobe, the costume,
Right.
all of those people on set. You have to interact with all of them, so it's a lot of energy that you got to waste. That sometimes it's going to be erased. Great
Sure.
reference, beautiful. We don't want it like it's trash.
Right.
Recreate it all, and it's I noticed that sometimes. First of all, I love going through that process in practicality. And especially coming from visual effects, it's interesting because it's a direction that they're not used to. I mean, usually they're interacting with director, they're interacting among themselves. But here they're like, wait a minute, you're going to do the blood in CG anyway, so why are we bothering doing it now? And let's talk about what kind of blood they're using, like how it's going to spray and how it's going to flow, and
Sure.
what do you care? You're going to redo it anyway. So it's interesting conversation, interesting for me to learn, interesting for me to explain what do we need for them, and what we can extend, what we can extend, what will be the things that they could do that will be very hard for me to do, or what are the things that they can do that will give me a good reference,
Sure.
or what could they do that I will be able to extend. The work in terms of the director, I think for his point of view is just let's get as much as we can.
Yeah.
So I think from what I understand, like the way everything was planned, like to see in camera something that will satisfy. And that, for the most part, you get something. You You look at the shots, like, oh, I see what's going to happen here. But sometimes it's just like it's really not convincing.
Sure.
And I had to be there and said, I think we can make it work. Like, don't worry, you take that piece and that piece, we'll put it together. Sometimes we'll make a little sketch just to show, everybody, so they know what we're going after.
Right.
When we collect those pieces. But the process was, we were talking about those shots. Sometimes it will be a sketch. Sometimes we'll just talk about it, and then we'll just go and shoot and try to get as much as further as they can.
Right.
But yeah, many times you look at it and it's like, wow, that's very far from where we want to be. And sometimes it's like, wow, this is amazing. It looks like, she's cutting her face to the, or whatever needs to happen.
Right. Yeah. So what about that? What about that as a genre? What do you think about working on horror films?
I mean, I think that in terms of visual effects, we have really when we can really do our magic is horror, sci-fi, and fantasy, right? I think that's our main place where we can grow. Fantasy. I mean, I love all of them. For some reason, I had to experience horror more than others.
Sure.
Also working now on latest feature with Ari Aster that's going to come out soon. Beau is Afraid.
Nice.
Where we also work with prosthetics and enhancement and stuff like that.
Sure.
I think it's fun. I mean, I like it because most of horror movies that are good, I think, are grounded in reality.
Right.
And I mean, it's true for sci-fi and fantasy too, but it's sort of like the distance that they go. Trying to think, most of them, I think, don't go that far into the other world. Like they give you a peek into this other existence, but you're not getting submerged like a fantasy movie. I think you I'm just imagining, you go into you open a door and you're in a different world, and then you might experience the whole movie within that other world.
Sure.
Right. Same thing with sci-fi.
Right.
You jump on that spaceship and you end up somewhere else.
Right.
A lot of those horror movies, I think, do just get like a little peek into those moments. You see something, maybe you don't see it. That's the whole thriller effect.
Isn't that some of the things like trying to create those moments that are filled in your mind and not on the screen, right?
Exactly. And I like that game. I like that sort of like going back from reality into this distorted reality. I really love that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. I was helping a friend of mine, and he was directing a movie called Splinter ages ago, and he had actually had the monster done in CG, and he's a very good CG person, and it was like, don't show it, because it's like it ruins the effect. And it was so much more effective when you didn't see it and you just had this threat, constantly happening.
Exactly. Like we're in our world and we get a little glimpse and pieces of
just enough.
I mean, Smile went further. I mean, actually a movie that showed a lot.
Sure.
But it was grounded in reality. It was real.
Right.
At least until the end. But, we saw that moment of like a stab. It was a real stab.
Yeah.
But it was still reality. It was just like it really opens up towards the end where you see this unnatural monsters and stuff like that are.
Yeah, I know Kristen, who's a producer on the show. She's very excited about talking about Smile and how. Very excited about that. She loved the movie. So,
it's amazing. Small production, supposed to go streaming.
Yeah,
and just making that jump into theatrical release, and sort of like, leading the box office for a little bit. It was a fun ride. I mean, nobody thought that it's gonna do the way it did.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts about the film industry? Obviously now there's, the dynamics have changed quite a bit. Like things like what you do have generally been geared towards streaming, and there's a lot more content that's being done in streaming in general. What are your thoughts about how that's changed the dynamics of filmmaking?
I worked on a lot of bigger production that did go.
Sure.
Actually, I worked on things that went directly theatrical.
Sure.
And now, because the whole world changed and became more streaming.
Absolutely.
We almost stream. But then I think when pandemic happened and a lot of streaming, everything went streaming. Movie theaters closed. I think there were a few things that we were playing really well on our bigger, 80-inch, whatever, 7, whatever big are your TVs or projectors. There are things that are playing really well at home, and there are a few things that you missed experience as a community. Sure. I think it goes back to that. And I think horror movies is one of those things. It's just fun. It goes back to a primal kind of like listen to a story around the fireplace, primal effect that you just experience, whether it's terror or fear or scream with the community.
Yeah.
And, watching while we were working on it, I was like, God, I wish that shot would be on a big screen and many people could experience together and scream at it, because it's going to be awesome. And I was thinking that we're not going to get that because it's going streaming. But
you did get it.
Yeah, and then I was able to sit there and view, look around and see how people experience as a community, and it was unbelievable. It was great.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
It was great. So I think that's opens up a new room for the classic.
Sure.
I mean, there's things that cinema meant to do, big screen meant to do, that can't really achieve streaming just by yourself. And there's
When you have
things that
100 people screaming, it's a difference than just you and someone else in the room.
yeah, exactly. It's very different. So, but I do think that it's changing. It's changing.
Yeah.
There is a bigger budget now for television, and you have amazing visual effects that's happening just for our screens, and it's changing the productions. Long form is becoming something that people are looking to do, and companies are gearing towards that. Episodic work, it's definitely changing the game or the industry.
Right. Well, that's wonderful. Well, cool. All right. I do want to talk a little bit about technology. Obviously, there's been some stuff going on more recently in the visual effects world and technology that is affecting how we do our work. Obviously, in the last 6 months, we've been seeing a lot of things happening in the world of AI and how that affects what's happening there. What are some of your thoughts on the technology, and two, how it affects the work that you do and the people around us?
I think, it's amazing. Some of the stuff is amazing, and I think it could really contribute the creative process, the exploration, especially because you're not narrow. I mean, you don't have to choose 10 options. Computer can generate 20, 30, 40, 50 options while you're in R&D, or when you're trying to develop an idea or concept for, let's say, design. You want to design a Bauhaus building, Some AI software will be able to give you 50 different versions of that, a take on, a Bauhaus building in the 50s, right? On whatever, 20s, and give you some color options, design options, could help you explore. And I think I can definitely see it something that we will use, even today. And I know a lot of concept artists are using it, and same thing for character design. I think that's where I can see it happening now, mostly with what we do. There's a lot of tools for compositing that are starting to work, so computer analysis, and that could help us speed up some of the process. That really, if computer can figure it out for you, why not?
Sure.
In terms of ideas, it's interesting. I mean, but there's still on top of whatever the AI will do. I think there's always like the edit. You can take those ideas, but somebody has to edit them into something cohesive. And I think that still will be a human. But I can see a world when you read a script that's being generated by AI and fed into some other software that creates CG animation completely in AI, music that's been generated from other examples. And I'm asking myself, will this be an art form that I will enjoy? Probably might be cool to watch, something that was done completely without, human intervention, or at least just being like triggered by a few words and just, grew out there. I don't mind it. I'm not against it. I'm curious to see if I will enjoy it or not.
What are your thoughts about people that are very concerned about the efficacy of it, meaning that, these systems have been trained on other people's work, and then that those people's jobs have been disrupted from the process?
I mean, this is absolutely, I think it's true. And it's always be an issue. But then again, when we're doing, I mean, a lot of what we do is always based as humans on somebody else's work. We always, throughout, history of the art, people were always influenced by other people and took some ideas, blended, and came up with something new. Nothing is sort of like being generated in midair. Everything's got a reference. Everything is another step evolving from another idea, every idea, in any art or any form of human creation, right? So it's, I'm not sure where I'm not, I don't know where, I mean, I guess that's what I'm thinking. I didn't take a stand.
No, I know. It's honestly speaking, between you and I'm actually having a hard time with the conversation myself, because I mean, I can understand there's a frustration with people who has several issues with it, that their art is being used and monetized by companies, right? The tech companies that are out there are profiting from other people's work, when those guys, all they did is they put their art on ArtStation, and now everyone else is just making millions and billions of dollars in their companies, just wreaking everyone else's work, which I think is an ethical problem for sure, in some ways, and needs to be addressed. At the same time, I think that this isn't going to go away.
Yeah, and it's yeah. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is like part of our evolution, but absolutely true that I think it's not fair. And if I'm an artist and I'll see my work somehow being, or pieces of it being sort of like augmented a little bit into some AI creation, I would be mad. And I understand the frustration and the unfairness of that for sure.
Sure.
Is
but you also think, I mean, just to try not to as you said,
it's unstoppable.
Yeah. But also at the same time, for certain, concept artists and people like that, I mean, these are a new set of tools that need to be
amazing tools. We've been all seeing that, and they're celebrating. I think they're happy. They're
right.
I mean, it's like, it's maybe the same guys that got, their images got stolen now can like, work through it, and they're sort of like forced to work with it, and they can see the benefits that you can generate with this. But ultimately, I'm seeing the difference. Let's say this. I'm seeing the difference when the AI image generators, engines, or whatever those softwares. I'm not going to name them, but people use different ones. But when they're being used by an artist, I think the results are always better.
Way better.
Just when they're used. So when a concept artist is using them, I see amazing results.
Yes.
And when somebody is just writing prompts, I'm seeing things that I'm not fully, believing in, or see, so it's still going to goes down to the artist. I guess that's my point.
Yeah.
I mean, I still believe in the human behind that whatever AI that's, at least for the very near future. I think after that, it's going to evolve. It's evolving so fast. It's like as we speak, things are changing.
What I find fascinating is the actual what people are asking the AIs to do is the kind of art that no one is thinking of. Like, I want to see jelly beans on a pizza from a skyscraper. I was like, who would think to draw that in the first place? But no. Yeah. And so the creativity that's coming out of some of these ideas is creating stuff that is way more unique, in some ways, in terms of the concept itself of what they're trying to see, which to me, while I still definitely have some issues with how some of these engines are being created. What to me is interesting is what's inside people's brains that they feel they want to see. They want to see things out there that definitely have not been done yet.
It's funny. We just today we kind of shared among us, a few friends, a video of this guy who was explaining about AI software, and this artist, and I saw that video when he was talking about all of these different engines and software that he's using for different parts of his production. I thought that at the end of the spot, they will reveal that himself is being an AI. But it wasn't. He's a real person. Okay. But I almost I don't know how far it will go. I was sure that they're going to say, oh, and by the way, he would say, and by the way, I've been computing, I'm CG character, and it's all been generated by another software. We don't know. I don't know what to believe anymore.
Yeah.
I think it's going to get to a point that's what we're going to lose. We're going to be inside the suspension of belief. We will not know where it begins, where it stops. And it's exciting, but it's also a little bit terrifying.
Yeah, it was totally terrifying and totally exciting. I'm with you 100% on that. I don't actually have the answers. I'm trying to not necessarily take a stance on this, because honestly, I don't know what stance I have. I'm not trying to pretend to be neutral. I am very neutral on it because I don't know what the answer is, but I have a lot of questions.
There's a lot of things working together. I mean, there's the AI, and then there's the metaverse, and then there's the virtual reality, augmented reality, which we didn't talk about, but I was dealing with, which I was very interested in. And I think when all of those points are kind of like, they're not together, but somewhere in the future they will collide. And when somebody can come up with a crazy idea and you could go into their virtual reality with some kind of glasses and step into that crazy idea, that will be very interesting.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, the holodeck will become very different at that point.
Exactly. And I would love to experience that
sure.
in the future.
Sure. Okay, cool. Well, listen, we're coming up towards the end here, and I just want to have opportunities. Like you mentioned, you've got a couple projects coming up. So can you say anything about what's happening or what people can look forward to?
As I mentioned, the Ari Aster movie that's coming up, Beau is Afraid. We worked on that. We had some portion on it, which was super excited. The trailer came up yesterday, 8/24.
Oh, nice.
Out. It seems like it's going to be an incredible movie. He's been doing horror movies, but I think it's stepping into another dimension there.
Nice.
Very interesting. We're working on another 2 different projects. Another one with 8/24. I can't quite talk about it, and then one with MGM.
Nice.
They're not. I mean, the other project is with MGM is called Nickel Boys. It's a very realistic movie. It doesn't have so much visual effects, but the interesting aspect of that it's all point of view.
Oh, nice.
It's all shot as if it's a point of view of this sort of like growing a kid that's been growing in the movie. But it was done with a very interesting technique, and we just finished shooting a few weeks ago, so we're stepping into post-production now.
Okay, awesome.
So it's like 3 projects going on. That's
cool. Yeah, very exciting. Well, very cool. Well, I'm sure we'll put links in the podcast notes so people can follow where you guys are and what you are doing, and let people know about that. But Yuval, thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing your great insight on all these great things. It was wonderful talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And definitely come back when we have another great thing to talk about.
Yeah, we'll come back and we'll talk some more about whatever's going to happen in the very near future. We'll be smarter.
It's going to be crazy. It's going to be crazy. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.